continue live coverage for you here on CPAC of the NDP National Convention, the first in-person convention for the party since 2018, and we've just seen the wrap of day one. Jagmeet Singh speaking to members of his caucus as I bring in two familiar faces with CPAC. Kim Wright, principal with Wright Strategies, worked in politics at the federal, provincial, municipal levels for more than 3 decades, including several years as an NDP staffer at Queen's Park. James Valke, Director of Research and Strategy at Viewpoints, has worked in the opinion and research field in the political, municipal, and labor sectors. And I should point out, also both delegates to this convention here in Hamilton, Ontario. And I'm just going to say right off bat, Jagmeet Singh has learned how difficult it is to keep to time on live TV, because he did go over by about 10 minutes or so. So thank you for joining us today, both of you. Listen, I want to begin our discussion with the policies that were debated this afternoon. I think that's probably a good place to start, because very much it had to do with affordability. And I'm wondering, in your opinion, how do the policies debated and adopted this afternoon differentiate this party from the Liberals, considering that Liberals, too, are trying to go after the progressive vote? I'll begin with you, Kim.
So one of the things that's so important as we're having these policy discussions is really understanding people's lived experiences. It isn't just an academic discussion. These are people's lived experience, how to get housing, what they're dealing with at the grocery stores. And I know that there are some who will say, oh, it's just New Democrats going after the big CEOs. It's so much more than that. If we're actually going to tackle these big issues about how to make sure we have a livability situation in Canada, that's what we need to start talking about. And that's where the New Democrats are at their best, when we're talking about real issues that face real people.
James, what would you say to that?
Yeah, I would say, from a research point of view, we see in focus groups and in polling time and again, housing. It is one of the preeminent issues that people are facing across the country. The resolution on building more affordable housing, I think, speaks to that outside of this room. I think New Democrats have been all gas, no brakes on the housing issue, pushing the Liberals to go as far as they can. But I also think the motions on the CEO pay and wealth taxes differentiates New Democrats from the Liberals and Conservatives in many ways, because they're willing to go there and talk about those inequities in our society. A lot of people are feeling pinched. Life is harder and more expensive, and I think some of these resolutions speak to those pain points that Canadians are feeling outside of this room.
Well, as you say that, I'm thinking about the grocery store worker who went to the microphone, talked about how she herself cannot actually afford the groceries that they sell at the store. But the policy proposals debated and adopted this afternoon, and in fact throughout this whole weekend, none of it has to be adopted by party leadership or members of parliament. So I'm wondering, how closely do you think leadership needs to pay attention to these policy proposals? Do they actually have to adopt them as part of an election platform?
Well, in large part, it does become part of our platform deliberations. You saw Jagmeet Singh at the microphone talking about some of these resolutions. You'll see caucus members as part of the debate. And I was in Quebec City with you a couple of weeks ago for the Conservative convention. You don't have that same sort of engagement, that same sort of transparent opportunity to listen to the feedback, to have that dialogue that we're seeing here on the floor this weekend.
But do you think the leadership needs to follow it more closely?
I think you need to give leaders flexibility, but what you're hearing is very much in these resolutions and these discussions a broader understanding about what do these policies mean, not just for people who are policy wonks, but that lived experience on the ground, and that's what we're going to continue to see out of the New Democrats.
James, you're nodding yes to that.
Yeah, no, the story of the grocery store worker who can't afford groceries from the job that they work at, the MPs, the leadership, they hear those stories. They get an earful in between conventions as well, too. They're very in tune with the membership, the policies, and while they don't have to directly follow everyone to the letter of the law, they're getting a lot of feedback at conventions that really help guide their strategic thinking going into the next campaign. I have no doubt that a housing policy of some nature will be a highlight of an NDP platform or promises in the next election, whenever that happens.
Yeah, except that I will say, as I was listening to those policy proposals and the debates happening around it, certainly what was expressed here on the floor is further left than what we're hearing expressed by members of Parliament, for the most part, in the Hill. So does that mean that the party, in order to stave off, Liberals going for that progressive vote, have to be more left-leaning than they actually are right now?
It's always about what can people's lives better. So some of these conversations, we heard this on the housing discussion. It's great to talk about affordability, but we also need to make sure that housing is being built that is accessible to people. As we're building new towers in community after community, making sure that the accessibility of those people who will live there is part of that, part of our transit discussions, all of that. So taking those nuances, which some will characterize as leftist, it's like actually it's just being human, and that's going to be the biggest part of always the New Democrat platform.
What do you say, James? Because, I will say part of the reason why people vote Liberal is because they see a more middle ground. Will this party necessarily run more left based on what we're hearing today?
Well, it's interesting. I think a lot of the parties reflect some of the conversations that are happening with the Canadian public, and issues like inequality of income, unaffordability, housing, these things are kind of in the NDP's playhouse, but because there's a bigger focus on it outside of convention, it almost looks like they're aligning more. But there is a strong bit of solidarity between blue-collar workers, middle-class, lower-class workers. They're all feeling it, and I think that some of these policies and the comments that people are making reflect that Canadian sentiment back at the party. So if they're pushing them to the left, it's because from outside of this building, Canadians are feeling that focus on those issues as well, too.
And we see this on dental care and pharmacare, and we've heard the folks in the House of Commons who have a really great dental care and pharmacare program maybe not understand the lived experiences, but whether it is people who haven't had access to these services and end up oftentimes in emergency departments, which are exponentially more expensive to treat, it's also making sure that people understand sometimes you have to front load those dental care and pharmacare costs. And that's really hard to make that choice between going to the extremely expensive grocery store costs and making sure that the prescriptions that need to get filled are being filled and that cavity that is festering is being taken care of. So understanding it's not just academic. This is people's lives, and it's entirely required to have these hard conversations on a convention floor.
Mm-hmm. I'm glad the music came down. We're from Ottawa, for goodness sakes.
5 o'clock.
Yeah. I was going to say, isn't that way past
exactly.
noise bylaws in Ottawa?
Listen, so that's the progressive side. But, I think we heard it raised a few times when people reference Pierre Poilievre. In particular, I'm thinking of Charlie Angus using a very colorful word to describe what he believes of those policies. But that is the second front that the party now finds itself fighting, because here are the Conservatives coming in with an affordability message that is gaining traction for them in the polls. There's no doubt about that. And also trying to go for the blue-collar vote, so-called blue-collar vote, which, quite frankly, the Ontario Progressive Conservatives did very well in the last provincial election. So is the party addressing that well enough during this gathering, do you think, Kim?
Yeah, so this is not a new phenomenon for us on the ground in campaigns, this conservative New Democrat battlegrounds, whether it's the 401 corridor from Kitchener-Waterloo down to Windsor, across the north. I mean, between the Yukon and Ontario, there isn't a liberal. There isn't a liberal to be had provincially. So it's important to recognize, outside of certain academic conversations, that these battlegrounds have been happening for quite some time. And ultimately, what New Democrats are talking about is how do we build communities? How do we help our friends and neighbors? How do we make sure that the kids in our community get to have an opportunity to grow and maybe even stay in those communities? We see the housing affordability. You cannot rent a one-bedroom apartment anywhere in this country if you're just making minimum wage. Those are the things that need to change. And it's really hard to do that if you don't talk to people on their lived experiences on the ground. Okay, but is that enough to counter, again, what is a successful Conservative message right now on affordability?
It's interesting. I would say voters are fluid right now. We're seeing a little bit of a dip in the Liberal support nationally that has been shown for the last 3 or 4 months in public opinion polls. Conservatives have gone up. I think New Democrats are fighting a two-front war. One, they're trying to position themselves as the alternative, the progressive alternative with solutions to the Conservatives. I think the Liberals are a bit out of gas centrally, and New Democrats are driving the agreements on dental care and other things that they're taking victories for. But they are also needing to look as though they are fighting for the blue-collar worker, the auto shop owner in Thunder Bay, in Northern Ontario, in Southwestern Ontario, in the prairies, and they're doing that quite well. They've got really good representation on the caucus with Charlie Angus, Brian Massey, folks out west. It's a really good representation representation, but they are taking the battle to the Conservatives on the front lines for those blue collar workers.
Mm-hmm. And of course, the convention's just begun. This is just day one of 3,
Yeah.
so we'll watch that. But tomorrow there will be an emergency debate proposal dealing with what is happening in the Middle East, Israel, Gaza, the Palestinian people. Conventions are meant to unite party members. Does that issue threaten to have New Democrats leave Hamilton divided rather than united?
I am hopeful that as delegates are having conversations, and remember our last convention was an online one, so you didn't actually get a chance to sit and talk to your friends and neighbors, people you might not have talked to before, having those conversations out in the hallway. I keep looking out in the hallway, if viewers are wondering what I'm looking at, out in the hallway where people are having those conversations, trying to understand a different perspective and point of view. My hope is as we go into any of these debates, but in particularly this one, we all take a moment, we pause, we reflect, and remember our humanity of what we have seen and witnessed over the past week, the atrocities we have seen, and while there will be various language, I will always be absolutely clear. Terrorism is not resistance; it's reprehensible, and if we can start with that frame and that part of the discussion, I think it behooves us all as we go forward.
Last word to you, James.
Yeah, you will get no dissension from me on what Kim said. I agree. I think that a lot of the folks in the room are aware of the situation, and there'll be passionate debate, and that's good. I do think, to jump off Kim's point, New Democrats have not been under the same roof for over 5 years, and there's a lot of pull-aside conversations in the hall. There's a lot of friendly hugs. Jagmeet's walking through the crowd, meeting people, and I do think that adds a new element, a different element. It's not the toxic online space that X.com is, former Twitter, and I do think that will have an impact on it, and we'll see how that comes tomorrow.
Okay, we're watching. We may bug you again before this is all over, but Kim and James, thank you very much for the time. By the way, behind the scenes, we call you Jim and Kim. But anyway, but thank you for that. Yeah, it works. Okay. Thank you for that, our political observers. And of course, delegates during this NDP National Convention, as we said.